Don't be so sensitive. Dad laughed after my brother called me the family mistake. My aunt said, it's just a joke. I stayed quiet. Then my dessert contract made their joke cost $1,865. Thanksgiving in my family had always been the same strange mix of holiday card warmth and reality show cruelty. From the outside, anyone would have seen the golden light glowing through my parents' windows, heard the laughter, smelled the roasted turkey, and thought they had found the kind of family gathering people put in commercials. But if they stepped inside, they would have learned very quickly that the laughter usually had a target. Most years, that target was me. I arrived right on time, which in my family already meant I was losing. Mark's car was in the driveway, parked sideways across the lines. Like even the pavement was supposed to make room for him. Through the front window, I saw him in the kitchen, already holding court. My mother was fussing over him like he had just returned from a dangerous mission instead of driving across town. My father leaned against the counter with a beer in his hand, nodding along as if every word Mark said belonged in a leadership seminar. When I opened the door, my mother called out a distracted, "Hi, sweetie," from the kitchen without even turning around. It was the kind of greeting you give someone dropping off a package. The year before, when Mark had arrived 30 minutes late, she had stopped cooking completely and run to hug him like the holiday could not begin until he entered the house. That was how it had always been. When Mark made the junior varsity basketball team, my father bought him new sneakers and threw a little party. When I won the county science fair, my mother reminded me not to get too cocky because Mark was more of a people person. If there had been an award for existing loudly, Mark would have needed an extra room for trophies. I walked into the kitchen and offered to help, but my mother waved me off. She told me to just grab myself a drink while she handed Mark the carving knife like it was a ceremonial sword. That knife had belonged to my grandfather, and for years I had quietly wanted the chance to carve the turkey once. It never happened. The dining room looked exactly the way it did every year. My father sat at the head of the table. My mother sat to his right. Mark sat to my father's left, where he could receive the best lighting and the best attention. My place was between Aunt Marlene, who always smelled like Chanel No. 5 and white wine, and an empty chair no one had bothered to claim. Honestly, the empty chair felt symbolic. Dinner began with the usual script. My father bragged about Mark's latest promotion. My mother chimed in about how he was a natural leader. Any attempt I made to talk about my own work died somewhere between the mashed potatoes and the stuffing because someone would interrupt with, "Speaking of work, Mark has been so busy." And just like that, we were back to the Mark hour. Between passing the gravy and dodging Uncle Tom's political tangents, I caught Mark smirking at me. He leaned back in his chair, swirled his wine like a soap opera villain, and said that every family had one, and ours had the family mistake. The table erupted in laughter like he had just delivered the cleverest line of the night. My father chuckled, shook his head, and told me not to be so sensitive, before I had even put down my fork. Aunt Marlene, already on her third glass, added that it was just a joke, as if that magically wiped away everything underneath it. Years of practice kept my face still. My hands did not shake, my voice did not crack, but inside, something quiet and sharp took notes. I was not going to storm out. I was not going to cry in the bathroom. I was going to remember every second of that moment and make sure they understood that some jokes came with a price tag. After the laughter died down, I excused myself. No one stopped me. No one even looked my way. I went into the kitchen and rinsed dishes while Mark continued holding court about interest rates and wealth building. Apparently, watching 3 episodes of a home renovation show had turned him into a financial expert. My father nodded along like Mark was reading scripture. The water was boiling hot enough to turn my fingers red, but I did not flinch. I stared at a gravy-coated plate like it owed me an explanation. They had said plenty of things in that house over the years. Some had been loud. Some had been wrapped in laughter. Some had been whispered, like disappointment was a family tradition. But nothing had landed quite like family mistake. At first, I was not angry. I was numb. It felt like the moment right after you trip before the pain arrives, when all you feel is heat and a strange hum under your ribs. That was when Aunt Carol drifted into the kitchen with her soft voice. the one that somehow always made everything worse. She told me that I knew Mark had not meant anything by it. She started rearranging mugs in the dishwasher, like organizing ceramic cups could smooth over 20 years of being reduced to a punchline. She said it was just his way, that he had always had a sharp tongue. I kept my eyes on the sink and said it must be genetic. She chuckled like I had finally joined the joke. Then she told me not to be like that. She said families tease because they love. She reminded me that Mark used to call me Storm Cloud when I was a kid and said I had been so dramatic but adorable. I remembered being 12 and hearing Mark call me the defective sibling whenever I cried too easily. I remembered missing the championship spelling bee because my father said Mark's baseball tournament was more important. I remembered Christmas mornings where Mark opened iPads and GoPros while I opened a sweater with last year's clearance tag still attached. Mark earned pride. I earned patience. I lied and told Aunt Carol I was not upset while I scrubbed the same dish for the third time. She smiled and said good, because it was Thanksgiving and no one liked tension at the table. I said right, because apparently the most important rule was never ruining the mood, even when the mood depended on me swallowing insults. A few minutes later, I ran into my father in the hallway. He asked if I was all right, completely casual, as if he had not just laughed while my brother called me a mistake in front of the family. I told him Mark had called me a mistake. He waved it away and said Mark had not meant it like that. He told me I knew how brothers were, that it was tough love. He said it like a toast. Then he shrugged and told me I was still there, was I not? That one landed harder than the joke. I smiled, but it felt dry and hollow. That was how my family operated. If I stayed, then I must have accepted it. If I left, then I was dramatic. They tossed the grenade, then judged me for reacting to the explosion. If I flinched, I became the problem. By dessert, I was back at the table with my fork in my hand and my eyes on my plate. My mother served pumpkin cheesecake and made a big show of saying how special it was to have the whole family together. Then she praised Mark's confidence and glanced at me as if I should take notes. Mark was already talking about his next big venture. He announced that he was thinking about flipping a house, as if he had invented real estate. He said he might even ask Dad to invest, a father-son bonding thing. The dig was subtle, but it hit exactly where he wanted it to. Everyone laughed. Except me. Mark turned toward me with all teeth and asked if I was still sulking. He told me to lighten up because it had just been a joke. He added that I knew I was not really a mistake, then winked like that made it better. I smiled. It was small and polite, the kind of smile people mistake for surrender right before something burns down. At that exact moment, something in me clicked. Not anger, clarity. If they only saw me when they were laughing at me, maybe the only way to be heard was to change the joke. I stood up and said I would be right back. This time, I did not go to the kitchen. I slipped outside. The air was cold, sharp, and real. I pulled out my phone and called Tasha. I asked if she was parked. She told me she was just around the corner and that the espresso bar was ready. She asked if I wanted them to set up. I looked through the window at the warm room, at the smug faces, at the people who claimed blood was thicker than water, but never seemed to act like it when it came to me. I told her no. I told her to hold off because there was a new plan. There was a pause, and then she asked if I was good. I told her I was great. I just needed her to be ready. She asked, ready for what? I smiled and told her to be ready for a teachable moment. Because that night, my family thought the joke ended with me, but the real punchline was still brewing. At exactly 8:29, I opened the side gate. The Harbor and Hearth van rolled in like a quiet warning. Tasha stepped out first, with her clipboard in hand, her apron crisp, her expression unreadable. Two of our servers followed, carefully unloading the polished espresso machine and our signature stacked dessert trays. Tasha glanced at me and asked if I was still sure. I nodded and told her to follow the protocol. Keep it clean. She gave a small grin and said she loved a Clause 5 night. Inside the dining room was buzzing with post-dinner satisfaction. Mark was still talking this time about crypto and passive income, which in his case usually meant borrowing money from my father. Then came the knock at the door. Mark looked up and asked if someone had ordered pizza. My mother brightened and said it must be dessert, that my brother had arranged something special. My father turned to Mark and asked if he had done all that. Mark blinked and said, "No." My mother smiled toward the door and said, "Not him, the other one." She did not say my name, just the other one. A recurring theme in my life. Tasha entered like she owned the room. She wished everyone a happy Thanksgiving and said they would begin setting up the espresso and dessert station. Behind her, the servers carried in trays of creme brulee pumpkin mousse domes and mini apple tarts. The espresso machine hissed as it warmed. Everything gleamed. Joe leaned toward me and asked if it was mine. I said yes. She said it was special. My father wandered over, trying to hide how impressed he was. He was halfway into complimenting the setup when he noticed the clipboard on the counter. He asked what it was. I told him it was the invoice. I explained casually that all services were pre-contracted, booked under his name, with his card on file. His expression dropped like a failed soufflé. He asked if I was charging them. I reminded him that he had told me to handle dessert. I said this was how my company handled dessert. Standard terms, Clause 5 included. He narrowed his eyes and asked what Clause 5 was. I explained that any disrespect toward a named guest or staff member resulted in full charge and immediate service termination. Tasha nodded and added that they had incidents in the past, so the clause existed for protection. She said they were happy to continue if the environment remained respectful. Mark groaned and asked if this was about earlier. He asked if I was seriously still salty. I did not answer. He said I was being sensitive again. I glanced at Tasha and asked her to remind me how much sensitivity cost. She smirked and said $1,800 base plus holiday rate plus on-call team. Mark blinked and said I had to be joking. I told him I wished I was. Aunt Carol leaned toward my mother and whispered that I could not be serious. My mother whispered back that she had told me to arrange dessert, but she had not thought I would. I asked what she had not thought. That I would take it seriously, that I would do my job professionally. Mark crossed his arms and called it pathetic. I tilted my head and asked why he was sweating over mousse then. My father opened his mouth, closed it again, and stared at the invoice, like it was a pop quiz inside a nightmare. I told them they had two options. We could serve dessert and coffee respectfully, or we could pack up and they would pay in full. That would include same-night breakdown fees. Their call. A long silence settled over the room. Finally, my father sighed and told them to let us serve. Tasha gave a gracious nod and thanked him. The espresso machine hissed. The first cup poured. The tension did not disappear. It simply changed shape. Because for the first time in that house, I was not the punchline. I was the one holding the clipboard and the clause. The first shot of espresso hissed into its tiny porcelain cup like a challenge. Tasha slid it across to my father with the polished calm of someone who could make grown men rethink their tone. He took it, sipped it, and said nothing. Aunt Carol hovered near the dessert tower like she was afraid to touch anything. She muttered that it looked expensive, her wine glass trembling slightly. I told her that was because it was, but not to worry, because the invoice had already been signed. Joe leaned in and whispered that it was incredible. I told her it was what we did. And it was true. Harbor and Hearth had catered weddings, corporate events, fundraisers, and private dinners. Our setup was tight. Our timing was precise. Our team knew how to move through a room without disrupting it. But I had never catered a room where almost every guest had insulted me within the same hour. We had policies for nights like that now. That was why Clause 5 existed. Mark still had not touched anything. He sat back with his arms crossed, his smirk sharpening. Loudly, he asked what my next move was, whether I was going to invoice him for eye contact. No one laughed. Tasha offered him a plate of creme brulee and asked if he would like something sweet. He scoffed and asked if she had anything for bitter. One of the servers flinched. Tasha did not. She told him she could offer him a receipt, her voice perfectly even. Mark leaned back and said it was like performance art. Then he turned to me and asked if I really could not take a joke. He asked if I was still playing victim all these years later. I did not respond. I simply refilled Joe's espresso. Her hand was steady around the cup. Her eyes stayed on me. Mark kept going. He asked if I thought running a coffee cart made me somebody. Tasha's eyebrow twitched once. She looked at me. I gave a single nod. She said she understood. Then she walked over to the espresso machine and, with the calm precision of a surgeon calling time of death, flipped the main power switch off. The room hissed again, but this time it came from people gasping. The lights on the machine dimmed. The tray servers froze in perfect sync. Tasha placed a napkin gently beside my father's empty cup and announced that Clause 5 had been invoked. Service terminated. My mother blinked and asked what had just happened. Tasha looked at her with calm kindness and absolute finality. She explained that there had been one more public insult toward a named guest. The contract specified that full payment remained due, but service would end immediately. My mother looked around helplessly and said there was still dessert. Tasha said it would be packed and removed. Mark laughed and said she had to be joking. Tasha asked if it looked like they were joking. One of the servers began quietly loading desserts back onto the trays. The delicate clinking sounded like glass breaking slowly. Joe turned to me and said softly that Mark really could not help himself. I told her he never could. My father stood and asked if we could talk outside. I said sure and followed him to the porch. The air had grown colder, the kind of cold that cut straight through a dress shirt. He took a breath and asked if I really had to do this. I met his eyes and asked if he really thought it was just about dessert. Silence. I told him I had not started anything that night. I had not insulted anyone. I had not made a scene. But I had brought a contract and his son had violated it. My father looked tired and said Mark was just loud. I told him no. Mark was protected. And my father let him be. Every time they laughed off what Mark said to me growing up, they taught him it was okay. My father looked down at the driveway and asked how much. I pulled a folded copy of the invoice from my jacket and told him it was $1,865. It included the machine, ingredients, service hours, and he waved me off and said he knew what it included. He took the paper, stared at it, and nodded once. Then he said they would pay it. Behind us, the sounds of trays being reloaded and espresso cups being wiped down filled the silence like slow thunder. Quietly, I told him I was not doing it to be petty, but it was the only way they seemed to notice anything when it cost them. He did not argue. He did not apologize. He just turned and walked back inside. I stayed on the porch a moment longer. For the first time in my life, I did not feel like I had lost a fight in that house. Because I had not even played. When I went back inside, the mood had shifted completely. Tasha and her team moved with the quiet focus of people who had packed up from worse situations before. High-end weddings gone sour, corporate parties that turned political, wealthy hosts who thought money excused bad manners. Still, this one felt personal. The moose towers were boxed. The espresso machine hissed as it powered down for good. Every delicate swirl and every sugar-dusted tart disappeared from the table. Mark was sulking now. He tried to look unfazed, but his crossed arms and clenched jaw told the truth. He muttered that it was an overreaction. Joe, without even looking at him, said no one had laughed at the joke, and that was the problem. She told him he had not told a joke. He had taken a swing and called it humor. Mark turned on her and asked what her problem was now. Joe met his eyes and said simply, "You." For 1 second, I thought Mark might actually shut up. My mother finally spoke, using the voice she used when she wanted to sound soft while still wrapping every word in guilt. She said it did not have to be so dramatic. She said it was Thanksgiving. She said we were family. I asked if we were, or if we were just people who met out of obligation and pretended. She flinched like I had cursed at her. My father stood by the buffet table with his arms crossed. He had already signed the invoice. The sting was not really about the money. It was the principle of losing control. It was watching something unfold that was not his idea and that he could not fix with a lecture. My mother tried again and said we had always been close. Joe laughed, not cruelly, but in disbelief. She asked close. She said she had been coming to these dinners for years and had watched them treat me like an accessory. Like I was supposed to sit there and play nice while they roasted me for sport. My mother insisted that was not true. Joe asked her to name 1 year when I had not been the punchline of at least 3 stories. 1 year when Mark had not taken a jab and everyone had laughed like it was oxygen. Aunt Carol opened her mouth, then closed it. Tasha passed by with the final tray, nodded respectfully to Joe, and walked out the door. One server followed. The other gave me a small nod and a look that said I had done well. My mother looked between us, her face flushed, and said we were just a normal family. I told her we were not. Normal families did not need contracts to behave. My father made a sound somewhere between a scoff and a sigh, then muttered that he did not understand why I was so sensitive. I stepped away from the wall and told him there it was, sensitive. That was the line. That was the word he pulled out whenever he ran out of excuses. He started to say he did not mean. I cut him off. I told him he never did. That was the beauty of it. They could say whatever they wanted and slap the word family on it like a return label. But here was the deal. If they would not respect me because I was their son, then they would respect me as a contractor. Joe raised her glass and said, "Amen to that." Mark stood abruptly and said it was ridiculous. He accused me of bringing all the drama into the house. I told him no, I had brought dessert. He said I had weaponized it. I said I had made it conditional. He stormed out to the backyard, muttering about needing real air. No one followed him. My mother turned to me and asked if this was what it was now, if I was punishing them over a joke. I told her no. They punished themselves by never learning when to stop. I had only sent the invoice. Then I looked at Joe and thanked her quietly. She smiled and said honestly, it felt overdue. That was when it hit me. This was not just about me anymore. It was about everyone who had ever sat at a table, swallowed a comment, and called it tradition. That night, the silence finally broke, and the dessert was already halfway down the block. The morning after felt like the moment after a thunderstorm, too quiet and too clean, as if something should still be rumbling somewhere. I woke up with the echo of espresso steam still hissing in my head, except this time the hiss came from my own coffee machine, in my apartment, under my own roof, where jokes were not weapons and I did not need a contract to be respected. The first thing I saw on my phone was a text from Joe. She said she just wanted to say again that she had meant every word the night before and that she was proud of me. It was short, clean, and free of guilt strings. I smiled a little. That alone would have been enough to make my day. Then I opened the lock screen fully. 11 missed calls, 3 voicemails, 1 text from my mother. She said we should talk, and that was not how they wanted things to go. I stared at the message for a few seconds. How they wanted things to go. Of course, the annual routine. Ruin the evening, then act shocked when consequences arrive. A few minutes later, she followed up. She said Mark had been out of line, but I had escalated things. She said it had been a family gathering, not a business deal. There it was, not even 10 in the morning, and the new narrative was already under construction. I could practically picture her telling Aunt Carol that I had blown things out of proportion and embarrassed the family, as if being insulted was less embarrassing than responding to it with boundaries. I did not reply. Instead, I opened my email. I cleaned out a few catering inquiries and reviewed the uploaded invoice from the night before. Thanksgiving event, Harbor and Hearth, paid in full, no gratuity. No surprise there. Around 10:15, my phone buzzed again. This time, the message came from a number I had not expected. Aunt Carol. She said she owed me an apology. She said she had thought it was harmless, but after the night before, she realized they had been laughing at me for years and calling it teasing. She said it was not fair. She said I had deserved better growing up, and I deserved better now. I sat with that message for a long time. She did not owe me the biggest apology, but she was the only one who had offered a real one. That said everything. Later, Joe called to check in. She asked if I was alive. I joked that I barely was, and that anyone would think I had overturned the table. She said I kind of had just emotionally. I laughed. Then she said the line that really stuck with her was when I said that if they would not respect me as family, they would respect me as a contractor. She said that line had hit hard. I told her I had meant it. She said she could feel the entire table freeze when I said it. like I had short-circuited the family programming. I told her I had gotten tired of playing the unpaid intern in a sitcom I had never auditioned for. There was a pause. Then she asked if I was okay not talking to them for a while. I looked around my apartment. It was quiet, clean, and still held the faint scent of cinnamon and coffee beans from leftover samples. I told her I thought this was the first time in years that silence did not feel like punishment. Jo was quiet for a moment. Then she said that was how I knew it was real. We hung up shortly after that. I did not check my phone again. Instead, I sat down with a notebook I had not touched in weeks and started sketching ideas for the winter menu. Maybe bourbon vanilla ganache, maybe a hazelnut hot cocoa tower, something indulgent, something warm, something meant for people who did not laugh when someone stood up for themselves. For the first time, I was not just catering events. I was curating peace. 2 days later, my phone buzzed again. It was my mother. She said they were doing a little Sunday brunch, just family, and hoped I would come by. There was no mention of Thursday, no apology, no reflection, just brunch. It was the kind of message that pretended nothing had happened, as if espresso machines had not been unplugged in protest and dessert had not been escorted out like a fired employee. I did not answer. 20 minutes later, another message came in from my father. He said it would be good to see me. No drama. Right. The man who had once broken a television remote over a fumbled touchdown was now concerned about drama. I ignored that one too. But around 11, I found myself on the freeway with no real destination. Almost unconsciously, I took the exit for my old neighborhood. Maybe it was muscle memory, maybe curiosity, or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I could be near them without folding. I parked 2 houses down and stayed in the car. Through the fence slats, I could see them. My mother was setting the table with floral plates. My father manned the grill like he was overseeing a peace summit. Mark was already talking with his mouth full. Jo was there too, leaning against the deck railing with her arms crossed and her face unreadable. Then my phone buzzed. Jo texted that she had not expected to see my car. She asked if I was okay. Then she added that they were still pretending Thursday had not happened. I smiled and stared at the screen. Another message came in from her. She told me to come to the gate. If it got weird, she said she would walk out with me. It was not protection I needed. It was a witness. So I stepped out of the car and walked toward the gate. The late autumn air was brisk, sharp enough to make me aware of every breath. My footsteps crunched on the gravel. At first, no one noticed. Then Jo looked up, met my eyes, and nodded. I stepped inside. My mother turned and said, "Oh, honey, you came." With the kind of smile that tried to erase 20 years of telling me I was overreacting every time I stood up for myself. Mark looked over while chewing on something buttery. He said he had not thought the coffee boss would grace them with his presence. Same tone, same smirk. My father gave a tight nod and said they had mimosas and I could help myself. I did not sit. I did not touch the food. I told them I was not staying. My mother blinked and said they had made quiche. I told her I was sure it was great. But this had not been an invitation. It had been a reset button. I said I was only there to say I was not interested in pretending nothing had happened. She looked hurt and said they had been hoping to move past all that. I asked past what, because so far no one had actually named it. Mark scoffed and asked if I was still holding on to one joke. I turned to him and asked if he knew how many times he had used that line. I told him calling me the family mistake was not edgy, it was lazy. He said it because no one told him to stop. He blinked and repeated that it was a joke. I told him it was a pattern and I was not laughing. The table went silent. Aunt Carol cleared her throat and started to suggest that maybe everyone should just... Jo stepped forward and told her, "No, let me finish." My father stood like he was preparing to make a speech. He told me this was still my family. I looked him in the eye and said that if that still meant something to him, then he should start acting like it. My mother clutched her mimosa as if it might spill and told me I was not being fair. I told her I was being honest for once. Mark rolled his eyes and asked if I was cutting them off now over dessert. I shook my head. I told him it was not over dessert. It was over decades. Then I turned to Jo and asked if she was ready. She did not hesitate. She said yes. We walked to the gate together. There were no slamming doors, no shouting, just the firm closing of a chapter. Before we left, Joe turned back once, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. She said that for what it was worth, I had not burned the bridge. They had simply stopped maintaining it. No one had a comeback. A week passed with no more text and no calls. Just silence. The kind that used to feel like punishment, but now felt like peace. I did not expect anything else until an envelope showed up at my shop. It was handwritten with no return address. Inside was a blank thank you card. On the back, in tiny letters, someone had written that the moose had been incredible and that she was sorry she had never told me. It was from Carol. I stared at it for a long moment. That was all. No demands, no rewrites, just one sentence. For the first time, I did not feel angry about what I had never gotten from the rest of them. I felt grateful for what I had finally stopped expecting. Later that afternoon, Jo swung by the shop. She brought donuts and terrible coffee from a gas station 2 blocks away. I raised an eyebrow. She called it symbolic, a reminder of how far we had come. I asked if she was trying to trigger a flashback. She said no, just proving a point. We sat outside the shop under a heating lamp, sipping liquid regret and laughing anyway. Before she left, I handed her a small envelope. She asked what it was. I told her it was something I had forgotten to give her. Inside was a duplicate of the catering invoice from Thanksgiving, except I had written one more line under the total. Discount applied for the one person who never needed a contract to treat me like family. Her eyes filled. She called me a softie. I told her to shut up. She hugged me and left. That night, I got one final message from Mark. It was a single sentence. He said he had heard my coffee truck had been at City Hall that week, and he congratulated me. I did not reply, but I made sure the next morning's Instagram post included a photo of the city mayor holding one of our mugs and smiling. The caption said, "We were honored to fuel decisions that actually mattered." Hot beverage. No tags, no names. Just quiet success. Because sometimes the best revenge is paid in full with a receipt, a smile, and zero apologies.